topic which I am going to explain you in this video is factoring. These are the contents I am explaining in this video. Factoring. Factoring is a type of finance in which a business would sell its accounts receivable to the third party to meet short-term liquidity needs. History of factoring. Factoring concept arrived from ancient Rome. Wealthy producers and merchants are employed as factors to manage sale of goods. At present, there are more factoring companies registered with RBI. Parties involved in factoring: seller, buyer, and factor. Seller is a person or a company who sells its goods and services on credit, and whenever they need funds within the time they avail factoring by submitting the invoices to factor. Buyer. Buyer is a person who buys goods or services on credit and avails the goods at the time, unbox it for further business and make later payment directly to the factor. Factor is an agent who by seeing the invoice will pay 80% of invoice to the seller company. Functions of factor. Maintenance of sales ledger. As a factor, he will maintain the client's sales ledger account to check accuracy and payment details for further processing. Collection of accounts receivable. For providing factoring service, factor will collect all invoices or accounts receivable from the seller company for further factoring procedures. Credit control. This was the another useful service rendered by a factor is credit control. He will use some monetary measures to control credit. Advisory function. Like merchant bankers, factor act as a credit specialist to advise proper credit details to his clients and give business details. 80% of invoice. After checking the invoice of the seller company, the factor will pay immediately 80% of the invoice. Now we are going to see mechanism of factoring. First step, the seller made credit sales to the buyer. Second, the seller avails the invoice or accounts receivable from buyer for a later payment. Third, within the pay period, seller needs fund and he wish to avail factoring, so he submits his invoices to the factor. Fourth, after checking the invoice, factor will pay 80% of the invoice immediately to the seller. Then, fifth, on due date, buyer pays the invoice directly to the factor. Sixth, factor, after deducting his fees and commission, he will credit the amount to seller's account. Types of factoring. With recourse factoring. Recourse factoring involves pledging a company's invoice in exchange for an immediate cash in advance. Without recourse factoring. In this factoring, the factor will agree to take all debt collection in his own risk. So, any risk occurs means he has to pay it. Domestic factoring. Domestic factoring means purchase, funding, management and collection of short-term accounts to domestic buyer. Cross-border factoring. In this factoring, providing funds with their clients outside the border. Maturity factoring. In this factoring, supplier receives the payment of invoice on due date or certain time fixed by the buyer is called maturity factoring. Disclosed factoring. The factoring in which the factor's name is indicated in the invoice and asking the purchaser to pay the factor is called disclosed factoring. Undisclosed factoring. It is a type of factoring for financing deliveries to the debtors without any notification of the payment claims. Agency factoring. It is also known as bulk factoring. Bank participate factoring. Bank has a third party will enter into factoring.